Well, hello, Ron, and welcome
Hello,
to
Matthew.
this week's Figuring It Out. We're going to cover how to do a worthwhile incident response tabletop. And while we do that, we're going to have some really amazing backgrounds that are very digi. So, yay to us. We went from like slackers being outside to we're just going to make it all formal here. Like, this doesn't feel like us, but it
Very
is.
formal.
Trust us.
The one thing that we have figured out is professionalism in backgrounds and presentation. Next, I think we're going to work on bumpers. We're going to up the game a little bit on the video series as we go forward.
I just asked if there's stuff flying in from all sides like that. As long as it happens,
We could do that. We
that's
could
what
do, some presentation spiffiness. Well, cool. I
I'm
mean,
not-
IR tabletops, it's been kind of funny. We were chatting before we actually got started here, and one of the things that I know we were talking about was how, kind of hilariously 4 or 5 years ago when pandemic planning started to be a bigger thing or stuff that people would talk about, especially in tabletops, people kind of scoffed and laughed at them. But, here we are in the middle of a pandemic. Yeah, Matt being one of those people. But here we are now in the middle of a pandemic. And I think it's really just put the value on the fact that, people, even if they weren't doing pandemic tabletops or disaster recovery tests, we're still thinking about what steps they needed to take during a pandemic. So, in large part, most people have kind of figured out exactly what they needed to do. But then what we've seen during this pandemic is kind of an increase in tabletops. I'm not sure if that's because people are moving away from doing full-blown DR tests or actual security scenarios, but I think, we've also seen kind of an increase in the security tabletops just because it's an easy way to get a bunch of people together on a topic and actually work out exactly what needs to be done given, a multitude of scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, look, the idea is to push your organization outside of its comfort zone, right? And for years, my entire career, folks have done some kind of DR test. And while not necessarily a disaster, an incident can clearly be disastrous. And for the last couple of years, we've done, a fair amount of tabletops. And I think the benefit is exactly the same in terms of, or when compared to the business, business continuity, disaster recovery tabletops. You're going to find process breakdowns, people breakdowns in a safe way, right? That's the value you get out of it. And you don't have to do a penetration test to do a tabletop.
Yeah. And that's kind of the fun part, right? You're in a safe environment. And I think when people are, when people are put in the situation that they start to do or start to plan for this tabletop, we talked about, or kind of what we wanted to talk about was delivering a useful tabletop, but it is that safe environment. So I think starting with the ground rules when people are putting this stuff together is important to kind of walk through people's or really the goals of the tabletop, but then to also assure them that we're not here to trip anybody up. We're actually here. And the biggest goal for that tabletop is to make sure that all of the gaps are covered, or if you unearth communication breakdowns or process breakdowns or technological breakdowns, those are the things that are identified that actually make whatever it is, whether it's business continuity or whether it's, security incident response better, then it's better. Right. It's not, it's not like a gotcha. It's not like it's a big fail. We're doing it almost as an assessment to make sure that we have the bases covered.
We've seen people get so worried and they almost, and certainly be prepared. I'm not suggesting show up and throw, don't prepare at all, but they almost want to over-engineer it and want to figure the whole scenario out. Like we've seen that where customers are like, give us the scenario, walk us through. Our management wants to know, like, whoa, time out. Part of the point of this is to get you uncomfortable, that you don't have all of the answers, that you have to think on your feet, that you interact with different business units. We've seen customers that, to their credit, their senior leadership, C-suite, said, I'm removing information security from key elements of this because I think all that you'll do is call up information security and make them do everything. And that's not how it can really work should we get hit with an incident, right? A lot of organizations want to think that way, that IT or InfoSec, that they're just going to swoop in and save the day. And maybe they can, but do you really want information security to make every single decision along the way? You probably don't. You probably want other stakeholders involved. And that's the kind of thing a tabletop can do, is it doesn't have to take,
Yeah.
days or weeks of time. It can be a couple of hours.
Yeah. And that's what I think, unfortunately, some people kind of jump right into that and think like, oh, it's a tabletop exercise. It's going to be a half a day or whatever. But realistically, I mean, we've seen people do these where it's just an hour, and then, maybe it's an hour for a couple weeks or whatever, make it like an ongoing meeting, and you can stop, right? And you can pick up where you left off and then just continue on the next the next week, and just, oh, just a reminder, this is where we left off. This was the scenario. This is what we were working on, and just kind of go on. And that's what, it doesn't have to be a gigantic exercise. It can be something that's relatively not mundane, but it can be part of like a regular meeting that goes on.
Yeah, and with that, I think the other thing we want to stress is it doesn't have to feel, and it doesn't have to be complicated, but you should make the scenario interesting, right? Like sometimes clients will come to us and say, I just want to do something about ransomware. Okay, we can and have, but you're really limiting the value you're going to get out of the exercise and out of us. Because honestly, ransomware is very straightforward. Like, there's fairly defined playbooks that can adapt to any organization with respect to ransomware. But when you add the wrinkles, when you bring in, your outside counsel, inside counsel, communications, human resources, when you layer in all those different stakeholders, you get them in the same room, that can be really powerful. And, we get to, without giving away too much, and not because we're playing coy, but, we assign different roles to people, and you can, role play. And that's where folks will, again, get pushed outside that comfort zone and have to think, and not be too worried about this scenario can happen in this exact way. You got to kind of suspend the disbelief, right? But go with it. Trust us. Trust your people that are coming up with the scenario if it's not someone like us.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to include executive management, even though it may be a little bit painful to get somebody to participate because they're, relatively busy. I think it's an eye-opener for those folks. And then also folks that may not necessarily all be part of an incident response function or a business continuity function. So, I remember years ago starting to include like marketing folks on security incidents, right? Before there was a lot of notification laws. And then as the notification laws started to come into play, it was, okay, how can we get out ahead of this? Who's your media contact or your media contact when the news stations start to call? And how are you going to designate that person as the, public information officer? And what can they say and what can they not say? So they need to talk to legal. So like having all of these people involved, while it may be at first a little bit daunting to get everybody on board, I think a lot of people have kind of moved past that. So when legal and marketing or outside counsel or whatever it may be gets involved now, people are kind of, they're used to at least hearing about this or maybe running through these scenarios. Whereas 5 years ago, people are like, wait, why do I need to be involved? Why does, our external marketing department need to be involved in a breach scenario? It's like, it's important, trust us.
And do you want the first time that this group has yeah, people might see each other by the water cooler, well, maybe not in 2020 because no one's going anywhere, but we might have certain dynamics in an organization that are passable. But when you rep this, you're going to build up, I know that Mary's really good at this. Mary responded well, or, hey, Mary and I worked through that problem when we were in the tabletop. You just get an opportunity to build a better connection amongst those stakeholders. And not to say that it can't happen, without doing this exercise, but I think if you do this exercise, it really primes the pump. Like, do you want the first time that everyone figures this out to be on a real incident that is timely? Doesn't sound like a great plan to me, right? I'd rather us go through the safe space, work it out, and then we kind of learn our lessons and hopefully improve. That's really the goal here. And that's what we don't always see is, can you take the lessons from that tabletop and apply it going forward? Make sure you do.
That's an important point, actually, and not even just I mean, it is the lessons learned and how you move them going forward, but then sometimes it really is just about that first step, right? Forming the team and understanding what capabilities are within the team and who's in charge of what, or who's going to be taking care of which task, or even how you dole out the tasks based on the scenario. And so many times, if people don't know that when they get into a real life scenario, it's people don't understand what they should be doing or what they could be doing as part of the team to actually accomplish the goal that they're looking to do. So
Yeah, so it's, quick summary here as we wind down. Make sure you come up with a scenario that's going to challenge the organization. Don't make it too narrow. Know that you can get it done, and there's a lot of ways to kind of work through it, right? Whether you string it out 1 hour a week or 1 hour a month for a while, but also know if you just crank it out in a half day, that can be good to bring everyone together. Make sure you get the right stakeholders in there. Like you said, get C-suite buy-in or senior leadership. That's so huge. When they participate, you can just see it sets the tone for how that exercise is going to go. So I can't stress that enough. And don't just point at your IT or InfoSec group and go, well, you guys are the experts, figure it all out. It's got to be a shared burden. You guys got to work through it together.
big time.
And make sure you don't fall victim to that, like, this could never happen to us. Like, if it's been in the news, it can happen to you.
Yeah.
So go with it.
Cool. Well, very good. Do we know what our next topic is, or is it going to be the
I think we're going to
surprise?
have a special guest that we're confirming for next week. So
Okay.
I'll leave a little bit of mystery in the air.
Well, hopefully by the next time we'll have our bumpers figured out. Maybe we'll do more fancy intros and outros, but we'll see.
Said I just want some stuff flying in from all angles.
Yeah, we could do that. Lasers and stuff.
All right. Well, thank you, Ron. I appreciate it. And we'll do it again next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt.